And then I got pregnant, and all changed. And the timing was perfect because we were through. He wanted to get back to St. Pete to be with family.
It had been a year. We'd been, flitting all around with these jobs. And then
2 years.
it'd been almost 2 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we came back home, and I flew home with Kenny. He was born in Bainbridge, Georgia.
Bainbridge, Georgia.
And we settled in a little house. We lived with his mom and daddy for a while, and he got a job right away with, wasn't it with your uncle for a while?
I'm trying to think.
I think that was for a while, but he always had a job. I never had to worry about that.
I'm gonna check my records.
And
which job did I have?
He was making good money, and we weren't spending it because we just didn't.
Free rent.
And we had
From
enough
mom and
money
dad.
to put down on a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath home
Which
to start
I
our
would like to-
family.
I would like to come in and tell that part because I'm proud of it. I had heard from older people say, now you're a veteran now, you're done. You got this thing called the VA bill. It gets all kinds of help they'll give you.
Right.
So I called the Veterans Administration when they talked about a house, and I said, well, tell me about the house. He said, we just back you completely. All you got to do is sign. You buy the house, it'll probably be $300 to $500 down. You'll have a house.
Wow.
I said, really? That's it? They said, that's it. And come on down. It was downtown St. Pete then. It wasn't out at VA. They had administrative offices. And I signed up, and he said, hey, just get yourself a house. And we started shopping, and Karen
Found a little house on Yale Street, and we loved it. Bought it for
$6,700.
$6,700,
First house.
and we put $300 down, and our payments were $64 a month.
That's my favorite part
Yeah.
of any story when somebody asks me if I want to top somebody in a story. I got one to top you. Hey,
Then a
have you
number
ever
two,
had a house?
soon after that, 19 months later, I had another little boy. Kenny was first, Bobby was second, and Dick decided to go back to school. And through
Again, GI Bill, it was
through
there.
those
and they
next
were trying to get
years-
us to go back because by that time Vietnam was in full swing, and they knew there was going to be a huge influx of the ones that made it in Vietnam, and they were advertising it a lot. If you're a veteran, go to school, and
So they helped us through school, the veterans did, and we had the children. He finally got his degree, his 4-year degree, and became a teacher.
I would like to add again. I would, well, because I don't want to skip over it, because I think it's important for history. And I became a teacher. They talked me into going into education because Florida was out of teachers. They especially needed male teachers. It was down to about 3%, which it was a disaster in the making. You take that many men teachers out, and it was a whole thing I could say about education. And they were giving us carte blanche. You come, we'll get you extra money, we'll get you tutors, we're going to treat you like gold, and they did. Classes philosophy class or something, they'd give you a tutor. I mean, they were really treating us like gold. And I thought, what's the downside here? And I ended up with a career.
And I was a housewife, enjoying every minute of being with my kids, and he put me on a program with a whole diagram. When they brush their teeth, they get a star. When they go to nap time without complaining, they get a star. He gave me materials to educate him during the day.
From the lessons I was getting
lessons.
from
So
being
I
a
was
male
really homeschooling
possible
him
teacher.
through his degree. And I loved every minute of it. And I will never forget when we knew Daddy was coming home, either from school or from his education. We'd all yell, "Daddy's Daddy's home.
It was so corny.
And
Till I loved
he
it.
would come in no matter what he had been doing, either his lessons or his teaching, and we'd draw a big bubble bath for him. And he'd get in the bubble bath, and we'd all sit around the bathroom that was really small and talk about his day.
And the
Oh,
reason
my
for the bubble
goodness.
baths was the jobs I was working were all really low-paying jobs like carpentering. Well, that was one of the higher ones, but they didn't pay much back
He did
then.
everything
I was
he could
nasty
do
when I
to get
got
through
home.
school by climbing trees and cutting palm fronds, cleaning garages. He made a makeshift trailer and went out and asked if people wanted their garages cleaned or their trees cleaned. And he always came back with enough money that we had for the week. So I just, I thought this was normal. This was normal life. It was wonderful. It was a wonderful life.
Wow.
And we decided that we should, with the money that we always saved, because we always lived below our means, and when he got his teaching job, we, of course, were making a lot more money than cleaning trees and things like that. And we started saving it. So we went from a little 2-bedroom.
That was when I got my job.
Yeah.
I actually got a job. I thought this is going to be tough. first school I went to, because they taught me into taking elementary education because the elementary schools were collapsing. No men. And they explained that to you. We just need men. You won't hardly have to teach. The kids will be just happy looking at you because, jobs had exploded. It was all women. And maybe it sounds bad at this age, but it was happening. The women were going into the work market,
Right.
but they were not. Education was wrapped. Men were like, the school I finally went to was Belcher Elementary School. I got a job at. And it was like a celebrity. I mean, just showing up there, an old veteran. I was
Right.
20-something. But because I was a veteran, and there was only one other man in the school, it was, needless to say, they were excited because that was a break that was happening in the 60s.
And we did something that young people are doing today, or have been over the years. I think we jumped the gun a little bit, but my mother and daddy were raised during the Depression, and
As were mine.
they lived very much below their means all their lives and taught me. And so I knew how to handle money and how to save money. And we decided to buy a big old 2-story home we had been told about in Woodlawn. And it was a 4-bedroom or 5-bedroom with
5-bedroom.
3 baths, and it was a mess. And we spent the next year cleaning that up and bought it for like
13.
$13,000
Oh my.
and stayed in it for 2 years, fixed things up, and finally I said,
Location.
honey, after 2 years of everything broken and fixing it one time.
It was kind of like we call HE double matchsticks.
Yeah.
So I said, honey, we've got to get out of here. And Bobby had been born with bronchial asthma. And Dr. Wunderlich, our holistic doctor, said, really for his better health, the two of you ought to go to the beach. So we ended up
The beach, that's where rich
selling
people live.
selling the house after 2 years for we made $10,000 on it, and that's a lot of money back then. And we had enough money to go out. And he went to school one day, and he said, "I'm going to take Kenny with me," because he was in 1st grade. He said, "You take Bobby, and you go from Madeira Beach, not in Madeira Beach, but on the edge of Madeira Beach and Reddington."
Where it meets Reddington.
is where I want to live. And that afternoon, I called him at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and said, "Come, I've met a couple that have a house for sale by owner." And we bought that home for $34,000, 1 block from the Gulf of Mexico. And there we are, away from the city, in the clean air of the beach, And for 28 years, we lived there.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I heard a rumor, and it has to do with Bobby and the Stephanie boys.
Yep.
And a football in Bobby's eye.
It's coming.
It's coming.
It's coming. That's the next chapter.
Can you elaborate?
Well, they played, in the area.
They lived in what
they
gives
grew.
it location.
North-
They lived in North
Reddington.
We were in Reddington.
And they lived on the bay.
And the boys had just been allowed to reach out a little bit and ride their bikes.
And one of the boys
farther.
had come through the neighborhood and had been fishing. And it was John Stephanie. And the kids saw him and said, "Hey, where'd you get that fish?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, I'm a bass fisherman." And John was probably a year older than them and wanted to know who he was and where he lived. And we allowed them to go down.
Well, he said, "Come down. There's a vacant lot down there. Come down. We have little baseball games, football games and stuff. So if your mom and dad let you ride a bike up here."
So we checked it out. And hadn't even met the parents, but checked out where they were going to be. They started playing there, and one day they were playing, and Bobby was injured. And through that injury, we got to meet the parents, and of course the parents went to Indian Rocks Baptist Church, and within 2 weeks of meeting the parents, we had a knock on the door.
Really?
Yes.
And a visitor.
A visitor.
But don't forget, we met Lucy and Larry Stephanie. Who were amazing. Lucy was a musician extraordinary.
She
could
pianist.
play the piano while looking over her shoulder, never miss a note.
Yes.
And she was a comedian. And Larry was a cop, and then the kids were great. John and James were just
And what happened that day when
tremendous.
Bobby was injured is John prayed over him. And
These are kids now. He was a kid, and he's praying over
Be
my
about
kid.
how old at that time?
Bobby was
and
probably
Kenny were how old?
8 and
maybe
Kenny
7 or
was,
8, and John's probably 12.
Yeah,
John Stephanie.
Yeah,
Couldn't
Kenny.
been. He's not that much
And
older.
Kenny was 10. So
but he's getting his training, which we didn't know about at this little Baptist church.
Right.
So the lady across the street was Hope Aldridge, and Hank was her son, and he was part of that prayer as well. And there was a bus ministry, and they asked us if they could join their kids for the Sunday.
Let Bobby and Kenny come
And
take
we
the
just
bus
thought
with
that
us.
was
Fun.
wonderful. Take them away on Sunday.
Yeah.
How long will they be there? They probably won't get home till afternoon. They're in.
Oh, they're in.
Sign them up.
So we
them
were
up.
thrilled about that.
Right.
And everything seemed to look real good. And Charlie Martin and
Oh, it was General Reed.
Reed Doster.
Reed Doster. Oh, that's a side story.
Knocking on the door?
Good. Knocking on the door.
Oh my gosh! And there was this man. Charlie was Charlie, and this man had to be 6'4", silver hair, dressed like no man I'd ever seen. He turned out to be the man in control of the Southern Command during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I almost answered the door. I think I was in cutoffs and a T-shirt. I almost saluted him. I mean, because I've been in this. I thought, who is this? I didn't even see Charlie because Charlie's just old Charlie. And there's this massive man.
And the kids loved it. Absolutely loved it. Couldn't wait to go back the next week. Well, when we invited him into our home, Charlie made it very clear that they very much loved having the kids there and would love for us to at least come to
We
the
said
church.
you should come and see what we're doing because you
And
don't know
we
if-
were both. He, of course, with Reed Doster, he knew the presence of the man.
I was hooked.
And I just loved Charlie. He had cowboy boots on, a Stetson hat. He had the polyester double knit leisure suit or whatever they called him back then.
It was a leisure suit.
He was intriguing to me.
Well,
So
plus, and we have to say this. We love the way he kind of talked like this. He had a little bit of an accent coming from Arkansas, and I said I was immediately in love with that because a lot of my friends that I'd grown up with had accent. We call that a Southern accent. Not
Right.
too far Southern, but just enough to say, that is so neat.
So then the second week we're there, we realized Charlie had a Sunday school class that followed. And we had met John and Betty Lou Bench, Betty Lou was one of my best girlfriends
From
in middle
high
school
school.
and
Oh,
high
my
school.
gosh.
And
Yeah,
John
what's
was
the
one of
chance?
his best
we
friends.
were way over Northeast St.
So
Pete.
there
Now
we
we're
met
way-
them, and of course they came up and said, "What are you doing here?" And we said, "Well,
Yeah.
what are you doing here?" So we all went into the Sunday school class, and again, we loved,
Just fell in love with the church.
fell in love with
fell
the
in love
church,
with the people.
fell in love with the pastor actually leading a Sunday school class. So we're going on to the third week now. And the kids are happy. We're happy. We're sitting back probably 8 rows to the
Tiny
left.
little church. Now.
Yeah.
It might have held, I think on a special day, it might have held 300.
Maybe.
Maybe. And all was the old fashioned, what do you call it? Pews.
Right.
Right?
Was that the old, we call it the First Baptist Church of Burger King?
Yes,
Burger King.
that's
Yeah.
the one.
That's
Okay.
it.
All right.
So this third or maybe fourth week, Charlie, I'll never forget, was talking about kings and the 2 women that were fighting over a baby. And it touched my soul. When he made an altar call, I literally ran down
Oh, my gosh.
with a sin in my emotions, my heart, my whole being, to release something that I had carried for years. And I'll never forget it. I left Dick and my 2 boys back there. And of all things, Phyllis Alderman was the woman that
It's counseling.
counseled me there. And Charlie prayed over me, and he, at that time, said to the whole church, he said, "Karen, the devil didn't have to worry about you until now." And he said, he knows your name loud and clear. And he said, your salvation will cost you. And he said, but he that is in you is stronger than he that is in the world. And Phyllis said, "Karen, I want you to go home. Let the boys go. Let your husband fix lunch. You go in your bedroom, close the door, and get on your knees and tell Jesus what you did today."
Wow.
And
Still gets me emotional.
Oh, man.
that was the catalyst for me to have the desire to live for Jesus and to never live for the past. And I have loved. Now, Dick had to have his T's crossed and his I's dotted. He waited for about 6 months and thought I was a little going crazy.
Right.
Because I wanted to tell
admit.
everybody about Jesus. And I if there had been a soapbox, I would have had it with me. I wanted to sing for him. I wanted to tell others about him. And I knew very little about him.
And
coming,
then her family really got on her.
yeah.
You know, I think it was, I mean, they weren't totally ugly, but I think you were a Jesus freak for at least
Well, Mama was
couple,
raised
3
Catholic,
years.
and Daddy said the only way he'd move to Florida is Mama joined the Methodist Church. So all I knew in the
2
Methodist Church was
obstacles.
this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. That's about as far as I went. I enjoyed it, but there was not a doubt that Jesus was calling me. And with that, 6 months later, my husband comes to know the Lord and walks the aisle. And both of our kids were accepting Christ. And we were all baptized in Reddington Beach.
behind
the
a
beach.
house.
Behind
And
a
we
house
were
that a lady.
trying to- Charlie will be down shortly. He's going to
Yeah,
be coming
he
in
would
regular
know.
because he's retired.
But she
So he's
had a
gonna
home
come
on the
in.
beach, and we were all
He'll know. He knows
baptized there.
everything.
And so that was the beginning of our lives with Charlie Martin in First Baptist Church of Indian Rocks.
And
What was funny with Charlie, because he was an educator now, and we had kids approaching middle school, but not in middle school yet, we were just wanting to do something. And we went to Charlie and said, could we be sponsors? And he says, well, where? And I said, well, maybe middle school. He says, well, when you have your kids in middle school, we'll talk about it.
That's smart.
Yeah.
Wisdom.
So once our kids were approaching middle school, we just, if there was a test that we had to take, we'd take it. And Charlie, at that time, they had a program, and I'm trying to think of the name of the program, Evangelism Explosion. And he was big on that. And everybody that did any kind of ministry there or volunteer work had to go through that Evangelism Explosion. And you had to have a testimony, and the testimony had to be told personally. And it was a keep it simple testimony. Right. So Charlie just really equipped us, not only in his preaching and his mannerisms and his kindness and his love and his encouragement, but he equipped us as a mentor. With 300 people there, he could do that. So our lives were just turned upside down.
Well, let me ask you, so you guys had lived this cool, clean, one block away from the beach life up until Bobby gets socked in the eye with the football. Mm-hmm. And so you lived without Jesus here.
Yep.
What was it like for you two as a couple as you started to do life different? Mm-hmm. Can you just think back to that time?
Oh, I know the first 6 months with me going forward and he staying back, it was a little difficult because I'm uninhibited.
Right.
That's my nature.
Yes, you are.
And the emotions are, we discovered years later.
And we talked about it. He said, honey, you're drawn to Jesus because he's a male.
Right.
I'm a male. These were the things we talked about. And they were, I appreciated it. Right. He never was angry. No, he just had logical questions.
And I can remember say, I need more time.
Yeah,
I want to see. I was raised in Christian churches. I was raised in two different Methodist churches. When I was a child, I got my first, Cub Scouts there. Then I went to the Boy Scouts, and everything was right. And I think I could have been a poster man or poster young man for how difficult it is for somebody to introduce you to Christ when you've been hearing about him since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Mm-hmm. And it was making the transition from seeing him on the things they handed out. What are they called? The brochures when you came in? Mm-hmm. Picture of Jesus. Jesus is everywhere. And there's a point where you realize, he's a real man. And all that happened, and I wish I could give a dramatic example, but you make it over. Some people, Karen, with her open heart, and I call it that female love thing they've got in them. Mm-hmm. Mine, I had questions I wanted to see and study. And of course, I'd taken all those education courses. You got to prove it.
Right.
So I was going through the proofs of where it was, and I was happy as I could ever be with my wife and my children. But I was also watching other men to see if they were phonies, and there were some. There was. Sure. The fact is, we ran into a whole group at the old church. That was probably the best thing that ever happened. But they were there every Sunday. You remember them, who I'm talking about? Yep. But then on Fridays, they'd head for the honky-tonks and stuff. Right. So that was, to me...
Thanks for not mentioning them on air, too. Yeah.
Yes, but it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I thought, wow, those are
Well, I can tell you what he said because we were there when Charlie was divorced. And we weren't in the midst of all the sadness that the church felt. But he said, any man that can be divorced and still want to be on the pulpit and had the kids to raise, he says, I admire.
Wow.
So I think it was one of the catalysts how he admired Charlie Martin in a whole different way than I did.
More, his stock went up as I watched how he handled this separation. I thought, well, this is all brand new because I knew other families, and I thought,
And we
usually
saw
they
the
were throwing things
church
at each other.
taking care of Charlie and feeding Charlie and taking care of the kids. You're from afar because we didn't know anything about it.
Right.
But, this was such a learning place for us, being new believers. And I wouldn't say we were good people. We were good people. We were good people without Jesus.
Right.
And we loved each other. We didn't come in with any animosity. We came in loving each other. So it was wonderful.